Moving on then to the main findings of the report, and this section is worth a massive 30 marks. You have 15 marks for the findings, you have 5 marks for legal breaches, and then you have 10 marks for your persuasiveness, technical content and your conciseness. So how do you write the main findings and get those 30 marks? Well, the guidance has some great information for this section, and because the guidance is so important, I make no apologies for reading it out loud. It says on page 7, there should be a logical progression from the hazards outlined on the observation sheets. The key issues should be appropriately selected and discussed, and should not include any hazards not outlined on the observation sheets. The report should be well structured, the appropriate length, and not duplicate the observation sheets. The report should be concise, readable, and highly selective in terms of action needed by management. Candidates should include balanced arguments on why action is needed and explain the effect it would have on the standards of health and safety at the workplace and the possible effects on the business overall. And I will explain exactly what that means in just a moment. But first, we need to talk about the legal breaches. You need to identify 5 legal breaches and, more importantly, demonstrate your understanding of the reasons for those breaches. It isn't enough to just say these regulations have been breached, or to say this hazard is a breach of such and such regulation. No, you need to outline the reasons why the legislation has been breached. So basically, what do the regulations require, and how do you know it's being breached? That demonstrates an understanding. The legislation also has to be relevant to your workplace and your location. So if you're based outside of the United Kingdom, then there's no point talking about UK law, because British law only applies in Britain. So if you're based somewhere else, say India for example, then talk about Indian law, your local Indian legislation, and it could be the Indian Factories Act of 1987. If you don't have any local legislation, or if you just don't know what it is, then you could talk about international legislation like the ILO conventions or the ILO recommendations. Also, try and identify a variety of different types of legal breaches. Don't identify the same breach or similar breaches over and over again. We have some students who might identify the same breach under ILO Convention C155, failure to provide a safe workplace. Now, they might have mentioned that breach 5 times for 5 different hazards, but they're not really demonstrating a lot of understanding there, are they? They'll only get 1 mark for the first time they mention it. So try and mention different legislation and different types of breaches to demonstrate full understanding. Moving back to the rest of the main findings, let's explain what we were talking about earlier. When you approach your main findings, there are a few key things you need to do. First, you need to select the key significant hazards from your observation sheets to discuss in your report. Choose the ones that can cause imminent and serious injury to people, or also the ones that expose large numbers of people to danger. These hazards will be your most important ones that you will discuss. How many key hazards should you discuss in your main findings? Well, that is a really good question, and unfortunately there is no right answer, because it depends on your workplace, and all workplaces are different. It depends on what you've identified in your observation sheets. The examiner will go through your sheets and they will decide what they think are the key hazards, and hopefully the ones you discuss will be more or less the same. But how many should there be? Well, who knows? We would normally suggest a minimum of at least 4 hazards, that way you have something to talk about in the report. But you can't select too many either, otherwise you're not properly selecting the most important ones. So maybe a maximum of 7 might be appropriate. But Again, those numbers are not absolute. It depends on what's in your sheets. You can lose marks for poor selection. If you choose a very minor issue to raise with management, that will lose you marks. So for example, if you start to talk about, say, dirty plates in a kitchen, which could possibly cause food poisoning, well, yes, you're right, that could cause food poisoning, but is it really a major issue compared to all of the other problems you might have identified, like working at height and excavations and live electrical working and so on? It's not really that big a problem, is it? So when you write the main findings, each key hazard you've selected will have its own section within the report. So you might have main finding 1, main finding 2, main finding 3, and so on. Each key hazard has to be discussed, and you have to elaborate a bit more on what the hazard is and how it can harm people. Who are the people exposed? What might happen? Once you've done that, talk about the consequences. First of all, in terms of injuries for the people, what kind of injuries might suffer? What kind of ill health issues might there be? But also talk about the organisational consequences. What about the legal consequences, financial consequences? What are the moral implications? And maybe also talk about the disruption to the organisation. At an organisational level, what might happen? At this point, it's probably worth inserting your legal breach. So, what legislation applies? What does it require? How do you know it's being breached? Then you need to suggest a number of control measures, both immediate and longer term, and outline what the benefits would be to health and safety within the workplace, and also what would be the wider benefits to the organisation. You then need to repeat that structure for each of your key hazards. So if you've decided to talk about 5 key hazards, then you need to repeat that 5 times. And if you talk about the moral, legal, financial and general organisational consequences of the hazards, and also talk about the benefits of action to health and safety and the wider benefits to the organisation, then you're going to get great marks for the persuasiveness and technical content section. Let's summarise the main findings. Out of all of the hazards you've identified on your observation sheets, you need to identify the most important ones for discussion in your report. Do not copy or duplicate the observation sheets word for word in any way. Discuss each hazard and describe how it might cause harm. Outline the consequences to the person and the consequences to the organisation, remembering to talk about the legal, moral and financial consequences. Then talk about the legal breach. Outline it fully, describe the reasons for it and make sure the legislation is relevant to your location. Then suggest possible actions and control measures, both immediate and longer term. And remember to talk about the benefits of those actions. How might they improve safety at the workplace? And what would be the wider benefits to the organisation? Repeat that structure for each of your key hazards that you're discussing. And if you can do that really well, then most, if not all, of the 30 marks available will be yours.